When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof, like aloe or skins, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and brilliant marketing. But an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the business, making selling, and for shoppers, buying, simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Nobody does selling better than Shopify. With Shop Pay, that boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts are going abandoned and way more sales happening. So if you're into growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell whatever your customers are scrolling or strolling on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more, sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Skins uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/Westwood1, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/Westwood1 to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/Westwood1.
Every team, every topic, everywhere. This is Believe.
Welcome to Orioles on the Verge. This is Zach Spedden, joined as always by Bob Phil and Nick Stevens. And it is that time of year as we bring you our annual predictions. So this time around, we're going to split it up into two parts. In this episode, we're going to focus on some of the broader topics surrounding the Orioles this season. Before we get into the second part of the episode later this week, which is going to be our over-unders based on the various projections that are out there for Orioles players this season. And as always, we're going to be joined by Connor Newcomb, the host of Locked On Orioles, to do that. And we'll get into that in just a moment here at Orioles on the Verge, which is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for betting on all the madness. Even if your bracket is busted, BetOnline has more ways to stay in on the action with a free Sweet 16 bracket and live betting on every remaining tournament game. With the largest selection of odds on everything from college basketball to MLB, NHL, and MMA, BetOnline continues to be your number one sports betting source. From every Cinderella story to every hat trick, BetOnline has you covered with odds, stats, and more for every game, every play, and every win. BetOnline, the game starts here. I'm happy now to reintroduce one of our most frequent guests here at Orioles on the Verge. He is the host of Locked On Orioles, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. He is Connor Newcomb. Connor, good to have you back on the show.
It is fantastic to be back. I earlier this week on my show, I did my 4 bold predictions. So these will be my slightly less bold, unless things get out of hand, predictions on today's episode.
Well, and this is an annual tradition here. We always have you on the last show before the start of the regular season to predict what's going to happen with the Orioles and their players over the course of the regular season. So let's just dive right in, and I'll bring up the first prediction prompt. How many games will the Orioles win, and will they make the playoffs? Now, if you don't want to disclose yet how far you think they're going to go, you can do that a little bit later on. But for right now, how many games are they going to win, and do they make the playoffs, Connor?
I will take 90 wins. I think that's a nice round number to start with. And I think they do make the playoffs as a wild card team once again. I do think that the lack of a Garrett Cole makes the Yankees, I think, less likely to win the division, but I also think the whole division is stronger. So I think it will just be tougher for any of these teams to just run away with a division. I think it'll be very close, but I think the Orioles will probably finish in second with 90 wins and get a wild card again. And hopefully that's good enough to host a wild card series. But we know how those playoff games have gone at home, so maybe it'd be better to go on the road this year if they do get to the postseason.
I do think it'll be relatively close in the East, even if the Yankees aren't as good as they were last year. Boston's better. Toronto's, they're Toronto, but at least for this year, they'll be solid, and Tampa Bay is always scrappy. So I'm going to go 94 wins, and they win the AL East by a few games. I won't say who comes in second just yet.
I got you one up. I said 95 to go more around. I think I had 93, as I don't like the unevenness there. But yes, 95, you win the AL East. And yeah, we'll get into more of the AL East here with the later prompt, but 95 and taking the division.
I'm going to go 93 wins, modest improvement over a year ago thanks to a better lineup and a stronger bullpen. It is not enough to win the East. They narrowly lose the East by a game or two, but it's enough for them to be the first wild card seed.
All right, next one is, when will Samuel Basallo make his major league debut this season? Bob?
Well, I think we asked a similar question in the offseason, or at least we talked about this a little bit over the offseason before spring training happened. And I would have said September 1st, he'll get about 125 at bats and be ready for 2026 to win the Rookie of the Year potential draft pick. But after spring training, I'm amending that to June, middle to late June. I think he'll be up, and he'll be up for good. I think he's going to force his way onto this roster and be a force in the second half of the season. And yeah, I know he's got the elbow inflammation, so he's only DHing in the beginning of the season, but it's the bat. And I think we saw enough behind the plate that he at least looked comfortable back there during spring training games, playing with the major leaguers. We heard Charlie Morton say, "Who's this guy? He does a great job framing my pitches." And it was Samuel Basallo. He didn't even know who he was. So no bias there. I think he's a guy that just has that growth mindset. So he's going to improve quicker than most prospects do. I think he's got that Gunnar Henderson side of him where he's just going to exponentially get better. And I think there's not going to be any denying him before July 1st. He's going to be in the majors, and people are going to be pretty happy about it.
I do think that for Basallo, the slight setback on being able to catch, I think hurts his. I still think, despite his talent, his one way to get on this roster before September would have been some sort of either Gary Sanchez or Adley Rutschman injury late enough into the season, like not in April, but late enough into the season where they're like, okay, he's continuing to improve behind the dish. He's swinging the bat well in AAA. Adley's going to be out for 3 weeks. Sanchez is going to be out for a month. Let's give Sewell a little run here and just see what this looks like. I think if he ends up missing, 2-3 weeks a month of catching, I think that's just the one thing that they're obviously still working on some with him. Like the bat is the bat. Obviously, he's still going to improve there, but like we saw it this spring, it's legitimate. If they felt like the defense was fully ready, they may not have even signed Gary Sanchez this year. So I do think that is what they would be waiting on. And because he might, he could be a month behind in starting to catch, I think if there's, an injury to Sanchez in June, I think we'd see a waiver claim or a signing of somebody off the street, or I don't really want David Banuelos or Maverick Hanley to be up here, but they'd find somebody to back up Adley for a couple of weeks. So because of that, I will take September 1st. I think my bolder part of the prediction is he will be in Baltimore for all of September without catching a single inning. I think there's a possibility where they carry 3 catchers through September, and Basallo is just there to mash, and they don't want him to worry about anything else and just mash, and then he'll get behind the plate in 2026.
Looking at the Orioles schedule, I believe I agree with Connor. I do think that Basallo is going to be held back a little bit by the injury. I'm going to go September 9th at home against the Pirates, which normally would be a sleepy Tuesday night game, but if you get Basallo's debut with Paul Skeens on the mound possibly, that could be a really fun game. I don't think that we're going to see a lot of him because of the injury, and because I actually think that the combination of Adley Rutschman and Gary Sanchez is going to give you a lot of production offensively behind the plate this year. So the Orioles really are not going to be desperate for an upgrade back there. But we do see Basallo this year, and we'll see him for most of September.
Yeah, I'm pretty optimistic about Gary Sanchez and what he's going to bring offensively here this year. Maybe famous last words there, but I think he's going to do more than enough to hold his own here and be productive in this lineup. And so I don't think there's going to be a big rush to bring up Basallo. So I'm going to say sometime in late September, they're going to give him, or early to mid-September, they're going to give him an opportunity to just hit DH, maybe not even a lot of first base, but they're going to give him a lot of run with the bat to get comfortable, get a taste, and then 2026 is, that's the year. You want to save that rookie eligibility for 2026, Rookie of the Year then, and no holds bar once Basallo's up for good at that point.
All right, I guess I'm on an island. Who finishes with a higher F-WAR in 2025? Oh, this is a spicy one. Tyler O'Neill or Anthony Santander? Let's start with Connor.
A higher F-WAR. Okay. O'Neill or Santander? I think Santander, because you can bank on him playing 150 plus for the Blue Jays. And whether it's sitting against some righties or listen, if Tyler O'Neill plays 120 games for the Orioles this year, I would feel honestly okay about that. Just with the amount of injuries he has had, if he can avoid the big one, and I am writing in at least one IL stint for him. That's just the player he's been. Hopefully it's not too long. And I'm writing in some games where he sits against righties. Because of just the volume that Santander will play versus O'Neill, I will take that on a per plate appearance basis. I do think there's a chance O'Neill is the better hitter, but WAR can certainly be a counting stat depending on how much you're going to play. And I think Santander will accrue more just because of that playing time. I mean, he's shown that he's gotten his body right recently, and at least for this year, he's going to be out there every single day for the Blue Jays.
Yeah, you look at this long term. Sure, was it the right decision? Probably. That long term contract with Santander is probably not going to age very well. I think that's something a lot of people can agree on. But I do think for 2026, and this isn't a knock on Tyler O'Neill at all, I give the edge to Santander. I think he's going to have a really good year. I think at least half of that Blue Jays lineup is going to be really good as long as they're together and on the field. And O'Neill's going to be huge for this organization as well. But for 2026, I'm going to give the bump to Santander.
What about for 2025?
Yeah, 2025. Same. Whatever year it is now.
This has been a long episode. I'm going to go with O'Neill by a slight margin. I do agree with Connor. You have to account for the injury, but I think O'Neill has a healthy enough season that the fact that he'll be better than Santander in every area except for home runs will give him a little bit of an edge. I expect him to walk more. And one thing that I think could be a lot better for O'Neill this year than last year is his defense. I'm just curious to see what a full, healthy offseason coming off a relatively healthy year for him does for his body, not to mention the short right field at Camden Yards. If the Orioles can keep him out of left field for most of this season and have him playing that short right field at Camden Yards, I think his defensive value is actually going to be pretty good. So I just feel like across the board, O'Neill will have a better season. And I think the games played, Santander will have the edge there, but it will be close enough that O'Neill's overall value allows him to narrowly edge out Santander for F4.
Yeah, I agree with Zach. I think it might be a little underrated how the turf in Toronto, playing 81 games on the turf, is going to do for Santander. I know he doesn't love playing on the turf, but he signed there for 5 years, so good luck. Get your bag. But I think it's kind of underreported. Yeah, obviously, Santander's been in much better shape the last 3 years, played in pretty much every game, but he was an injury-prone guy a little bit before that, and now he's getting a little bit older, getting on the turf. He might have a short IL stint, might miss a few games here and there. So, and I'm going to bank on, maybe it's not the smartest thing to do, but I'll bank on Tyler O'Neill staying relatively healthy. Like Connor said, 120, push 130 games if we're lucky. Yeah, I think between a slight better defensive metrics and just on a per at bat basis, I think Tyler O'Neill is the better hitter. Then I'll give a slight edge to TON.
We're now going to have a theme with these next few questions, which is pitchers starting here on the IL. When will we see them? We're going to start with Kyle Bradish. Will Bradish make an appearance with the Orioles this season? Let's start with Nick.
Yes, but again, my expectation is very few quality innings that actually matter. I can't set myself up for that disappointment again. So I daydream about Bradish getting back by the end of the year and sitting at the top of the rotation, forming a fun, 1-2 punch with, some in-season acquisition here. But we'll see. I'm setting my expectations very low, but yeah, we see Bradish at some point in the second half of the season.
I've talked about on my show a lot that people need to hold their horses a little bit on Kyle Bradish because there's a lot of, again, I'm not completely blasting the Orioles for not really bringing in a number one, but I also have not swung to the other side of, well, they're going to get Kyle Bradish back in the second half because we just don't know that at all. He got the TJ and the internal brace in June. It's 12 to 18 months. 12 months sounds good. 18 months puts us at 2026 at that point. So maybe September. They brought him back from an injury once, not too early. They just brought him back from an injury and had to get the Tommy John. I think after doing that, they are really, really, really going to want to make sure that he's okay. And all it takes is one tiny little setback, and his 2025 is toast. It may also depend on what the state of the pitching staff is, what the state of the Orioles are. I could see a scenario where Kyle Bradish gets to let it rip for 1 or 2 innings at the end of the year. That would be certainly interesting to kind of build himself back up for 2026. But I'll say we see a little something, a little Jacob deGrom type something where he came back and made like 2 starts at the end of the year for the Rangers, except they're a little more important because the Orioles are trying to go to the postseason, and then they use him as a reliever in the playoffs.
I think, well, especially because once the Yankees guy, Garrett Cole, he got the same procedure where it was the Tommy John plus internal brace, and they were talking about how that could shave a month or 2 off the recovery time by doing both, which is what Bradish got. I'm hopeful maybe we see him sometime in August, and maybe they build him up to be a 5 and dive, not pushing the pitches per game innings limit too much, maybe like up to 80 pitches an outing once he gets back to the major leagues. 5 and dive, get him in there. Whether it's used as a starter in the playoffs or down the stretch, or as like a multi-inning weapon that you can bring in after somebody, I think it could be useful. But yeah, you can't plan on that being the case because he could easily just have minor setback or just not recovering quite as fast as you want. So it could be a couple innings at the end of the year. It could be 0 innings. I think I'm an optimist. I'll say he's back sometime in August and does play a role on the team down the stretch, but not like enough where you couldn't go out and try to trade for Sandy Alcantara or something like that.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to see enough of Bradish this year to offset the lack of a top of the rotation enforcement for this club. So I do think they're going to have to address that at some point. My prediction with Bradish is that we see him in September. He maybe gets a few starts, and it looks a little bit like John Means in 2023. Hopefully with a much better postscript to that return. Means looked great, but then obviously has battled injury issues since then. I do think that we see Bradish in a small sample size, a couple of short starts, and I think ideally the Orioles would be in a situation where maybe with a week left in the regular season, they've got their playoff spot sewn up, and they could put Bradish out there for a 3 or 4 inning start just to let him get his feet wet again and build up towards 2026. I do think this, though, and Connor touched on this, I do think if the rotation is stable going into the final month of the season, and it's a gray area of whether or not you should bring him back, that the Orioles won't bring him back. They'll just let him rest and build up for 2026.
What about Tyler Wells, Bob?
Yeah, he only got the internal brace, so it's a little bit faster, and I think his procedure was done before Bradish's. So I think around mid-season he'll be in play. I don't think he'll make a start for the Orioles in 2025. I think he'll probably be strictly a reliever when he does come back, as long as his rehab and recovery goes as planned. But yeah, I think that'll be a nice boost to multi-inning reliever, or maybe even go back to his Rule 5 season where he was a 1-inning reliever, pumping a little bit more gas than he does as a starter. And yeah, I think it can hurt to have his arm available again as well, because when he's healthy, he's been very effective for the Orioles.
That one's going to be so interesting for Tyler Wells, because if you're the Orioles, you're going to get him back. I think I feel a lot more confident about that because he just had the internal brace and because there's a chance he could just come back as a reliever. And I think many out there, not all, but many out there, that includes myself, have kind of put Tyler Wells into their brain as a relief pitcher moving forward. Now, that doesn't have to be the case. He's been a good starter in the past and it still could happen. I'm just so intrigued by what the Orioles do. Do they see him as more of a reliever, see his rehab going well, and say, hey, we could get him in 1 to 2 inning stints by August 1st. Let's just do that and help our bullpen. Or do they say, we think Tyler Wells is going to be part of our rotation in 2026. we want to make sure he's ready to do that. We're going to continue to build him up as a starter. He could still come back as a starter this year if that's what they want to do, but that really changes that timeline. I say he will definitely pitch for the Orioles this year. I'm unsure what it looks like, though, and I think it all depends on how the Orioles see him and also what the rotation looks like, right? Like, if the rotation's looking tough and Bradish isn't coming back, they may build Wells back up as a starter, take those extra couple of weeks to make sure they have a starting pitcher coming back later in the year rather than just bring him back as a reliever. I trust the depth they brought in enough that they won't have to do that. So I think he does come back earlier as a relief pitcher, but it'll be interesting to see what the Orioles we may actually learn what the Orioles think of Tyler Wells' future with how early he comes back this season.
Yeah, absolutely. I am going to say that we see Wells shortly after the All-Star break, just ahead a little bit, knowing that sometimes these injuries can take time to recover from. I do believe that he's going to be brought back as a reliever. But as Connor said, if there's a need for him to pitch out of the rotation, that could, in theory, change the rehab process and the timeline a little bit. What I would say you really want to watch out for is when Wells starts his minor league rehab appearances. How deep is he going into his outings? Because typically when relievers go down to the minor leagues, they technically are the starter for the game, but they might only pitch an inning. If you start to see Wells going 2-3 innings and starts at Aberdeen, then he gets bumped up to Chesapeake and he's making 4 or 5 inning starts, that tells you all you need to know about what the Orioles were thinking initially. But if it's 1-2 inning outings at the most at every level, then I think that it's definitely going to be a bullpen situation for him.
And it's funny. I just looked it up. I mean, I know he's still on a rookie deal and he still has 3 years remaining until he hits free agency. He doesn't become a free agent until after 2027. He still has minor league options. Tyler Wells is 30. He's going to turn 31 right around when he comes back. He turns 31 in late August. I think he'll probably be back before that, but not long after he's back in the big leagues, he's going to be 31 years old. We're kind of at the point where you're not really looking at him as a young pitcher who could be a starter or could be a reliever. Like, obviously getting this surgery and the injuries that he's had, and the fact that he was injured when he was a Rule 5 pick have delayed him to be 30 now and still kind of be not fully proven in the big leagues. But in terms of his clock as a pitcher at about to be age 31, like, it's kind of the time to make that decision. And the Orioles are in a tough spot because of him coming back from surgery. But I don't know why I thought he was still 27, but I pulled up the Fangraphs page and I was like, Tyler Wells is going to be 31 this year. He is not a young man by baseball standards anymore. So that plays a role too.
This episode brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Shifting a little money here, a little there, and hoping it all works out? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can get a better budgeter and potentially lower your insurance bill too. You tell Progressive what you want to pay for car insurance, and they'll help find you options within your budget. Try it today at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
Companies at every stage turn to Upwork to get things done and find more flexibility in the way they staff key projects and initiatives by accessing a global marketplace filled with top talent in IT, web development, AI, design, admin support, marketing, and more. Posting a job on Upwork is easy. With no cost to join, you can register, browse freelance profiles, get help drafting a job post, or even book a consultation. From there, you can connect with freelancers that get you and can easily hire them to take your business to the next level. Upwork makes the entire process easier, simpler, and more affordable with industry low fees. Visit Upwork.com right now and post your job for free. That is Upwork.com to post your job for free and connect with top talent ready to help your business grow. That's UPWORK.com. Upwork.com.
And that's why I said you bring him back and you put him in the bullpen. Like, just let him eat out of the bullpen and squeeze every ounce of value you can out of that arm now. I'm sure the Orioles would love to stretch him out as a starter because this is what they do. But yeah, no matter how many years of control he has, you look at his age, you look at his injury history, you say he can help this team now in the bullpen and potentially next year as well. So let's just let him eat there.
And our third pitcher in the series, it's less, he had an injury in spring, but he'll be back relatively soon. But will Trevor Rogers make an appearance with the Orioles this season? / will he make a start? Or is he going to get passed up in the pecking order? Zach?
I'm going to stick to the prediction that I've had about Trevor Rogers since the offseason, which is that he will be brought up to the major leagues in the second half as a reliever. I think it's good to have him in Norfolk as a starter and work him as a starter down there because it gives you another left-hander. It gives you more depth, not to mention someone who has ample experience starting at the major leagues and has done it at a high level at various points in his career. But if the rotation is stable enough and there's enough depth that someone like Brandon Young or even Cameron Weston, who's going to be Rule 5 eligible at the end of this year, has a strong case to get innings out of the rotation late in the year, you can start to build Rogers up as a reliever because as frustrating as that trade is to talk about, the Orioles still have Rogers for 2 seasons. And if they're able to bring him up as a reliever down the stretch this year and have a hard-throwing left-hander, which he probably could be in the back end of the bullpen in 2026, that would go a long way to really working out the value of this trade. I'm sure the Orioles still believe that they can fix whatever is wrong with Trevor Rogers and do it as a starter. But I feel like over the course of this season, we're going to see the better option for him and for the Orioles is for him to pitch out of the bullpen. So I'm going to say that kind of along the same timeline as Tyler Wells, he's up after the All-Star break, and it's strictly as a reliever.
I don't know when he makes his debut. He will see sometime this year. I just need him to pitch some sort of meaningful innings for this team because even earlier this morning, I listened to another show, national broadcast, the Orioles traded 2 high-quality prospects for nothing. Traded away a quad A outfielder and an okay prospect who was completely blocked in Baltimore. So I just need Trevor Rogers to make some sort of impact this year so we can stop talking about the national media, at least, can get over this trade. They're going to continue to talk about it, but just get over this, that it was a disaster of a trade for the Orioles, which it may end up being, but we don't know yet.
Yeah, I mean, his timeline is obviously way better than the other 2 guys we talked about. It's a knee injury and not an arm injury, and he's already thrown a bullpen. The Orioles said he threw one late last week. So he's going to be ready, I would think, by May at the latest to pitch. Now, the question is, will the Orioles need him? Kyle Gibson will also be ready by May. So if they need a starter, it's going to be Kyle Gibson and not necessarily Trevor Rogers. But he's got options, which kind of works against him maybe a little bit because they can just leave him in AAA. They don't necessarily need to pull him up, but it also helps him because if they do need to call him up for a spot start, they can send him back down and they don't have to worry about going through the entire roster cycle and still having him as depth. I would pretty much guarantee he makes at least 1 start for the Orioles this year. You need so many starters to get through a season. A little quick preview of Wednesday's episode of Locked On Orioles. I talked about like what Kyle Gibson will do for the Orioles this year because it is a question. They have 5 starters. Now they're signing a guy to a major league deal who's going to be back in May. What if the Orioles don't need a starter then? The Orioles used 13 legitimate starters last year. That's not counting like Matt Bowman starting that game at the end of the year, like not counting openers. They used 13 legitimate starters. They have 7 who are healthy right now. They have 5 who are going to start the season injured. That's the 12 they have in the organization, and they used 13 last year. So I have a feeling Rogers is going to be used at some point. Now, how effective he is, I mean, who knows? But they are going to get to a point where they have to call him up. I mean, the Orioles last year DFA'd Cole Irvin. He cleared waivers, and they had to recall him because they needed so much pitching to bring him back up. I think Trevor Rogers probably has a higher ceiling than Cole Irvin. The Orioles wouldn't have traded for him if they didn't think that. And so I think he's going to get his chance once he's healthy. I truly have less of a read on him than any other player maybe in this organization right now, but he's going to get some sort of shot, I think, this year.
I think he'll make an appearance for the Orioles. I do not think he'll make a start. Now, obviously, he could. If they need a spot starter, he's in turn. You bring him right up. You can option him after the game if need be. But I think he's kind of I think Brandon Young is past him. I think Chase McDermott is higher on the proverbial list to give someone a shot if an opportunity arises. Obviously, they signed Kyle Gibson. Grayson will be back at some point. Tyler Wells, Bradish late in the season. Even a guy like Cameron Weston or Alex Pham, I feel like could pass him if he doesn't make the improvements that the team wants him to, which is increase his velocity, and I'm sure they're tinkering with other stuff as well. I'm kind of with Zach. I think he'll be a reliever pretty much for the Orioles, and unless they can work with him, get him up back to the Trevor Rogers he was. It's been a while, but yeah, people are going to be complaining about this trade for a long time. Is what I feel like, and it's fine.
Who will be the most pleasant surprise on the Orioles this year? And let's start with Connor.
The most pleasant surprise. How about Charlie Morton? I think the general public, only because of his age, is very down on Charlie Morton. And if you look at his stats, it's not like he was incredible for the Braves. But if I told you that Charlie Morton could pretty much repeat what Kyle Gibson did for the Orioles 2 years ago and make 33 starts and stay healthy while things, because it's pitchers in Major League Baseball, tend to crumble around him and have a mid-4 ERA and, have more than half of his starts be quality starts and keep his team in the game. I think in reality, that's what the Orioles are projecting from Morton. But in a lot of Orioles fans' heads, it is this guy's 41. He's going to be on the IL in May. And when he is out there, he's going to have a 5 ERA. I just think a lot of people, once they watch him, is going to be similar to watching Kyle Gibson, where I know Kyle Gibson ended up with like a 4.6 or 4.7 ERA with the Orioles 2 years ago, but just watching him night in and night out felt like his ERA should have been better than that, because rarely did he really let a game get completely away from him, and he posted every 5 days. And I think Charlie Morton is going to do that with better stuff than Kyle Gibson and have actually a higher upside that will allow him to make 30-plus starts, which he's done for, 7-8 straight years now or something, and just be a consistent force in a rotation with a lot of questions.
For me, it's another pitcher, a young pitcher that earned a rotation spot in the last few days. We heard that he's going to be the 5th starter, pitch the home opener. That's Cade Povich. I think he came into this spring, made some tweaks. His fastball's velocity was up a little bit. Stuff plus numbers are up to I think he had a 111 stuff plus for spring. He ditched a pitch. He's tinkering. He's got plenty of tools in a toolbox to go to with the pitch mix and keep guys off balance. Even Eno Saris, who has been pretty hard on Povich with not having the best stuff, is now turned all the way around and thinks he's going to be a good pitcher because he's got a nice mix starting this spring. I think he's going to be a guy that he's going to go out and pitch 150 plus innings, around 4 ERA potentially. I think he's going to be this year's breakout pitcher. If it couldn't be Grayson Rodriguez finally breaking out, and maybe he still can when he gets healthy, then Cade Povich, the guy you traded Jorge Lopez for and made comments right after the trade saying you think he can be a middle of the rotation arm. Well, here you go. I think he does it this year in his first full season, second season in the major leagues.
I'm also going pitcher, and I guess it depends on your view and expectations of this pitcher. I think, especially after what we saw this spring training, a lot of people are excited about him. But I'm going to go Tomoyuki Sugano, just because we know he quickly endeared himself to the fan base. So this isn't a bold, pleasant surprise take or anything, but I just think he's not going to blow anybody away. But we look back at the end of the season and say, man, Sugano had a really solid year. The super high weren't very high. The super lows weren't very low. He logs more innings than some think he may get this year. And hopefully it turns into a way for the Orioles to really start to become a bigger player in that market of the world. So I think Sugano is going to be really impressive. There may be some current concerns about, he's older. He doesn't have the big time velo, going from the 6-man rotations to the 5-man rotation here in the States. The Orioles going to be able to work with that. And is his body going to be able to hold up? I think he holds up just fine. I think he's a grizzled veteran that's going to be able to successfully navigate his way through the season.
Let's make it a clean sweep here as I pick another pitcher. I'm going with reliever Gregory Soto. Soto, I feel like there's been a lot of people have been quick to criticize him. And look, I think the Orioles gave up too much in that trade. I think time is going to show that. But after his first 3 outings with the Orioles last year, Soto was pretty much dominant down the stretch for them. Over his final 16 and a third innings, he struck out 20 batters and walked just 4. He was a big reason why that bullpen looked like it was coming off a cliff over the last few months of the season. Kind of held steady in September. He really helped reinforce some things. So I think that he'll be in a role that is suited to him, which is 7th, 8th inning guy you can bring in against lefties. The strikeout numbers will be pretty good this year. And I think that more often than not, you're going to be glad that he's in the bullpen, especially because the Orioles are probably going to be without Andrew Kittredge for the first few months of the year. And with Sir Anthony Dominguez, that adventure is just, can go a lot of different ways on any given night. So I think Soto is actually going to bring a little bit of stability to the back end of the bullpen and put together a really nice year.
What about the biggest disappointment this year, Bob?
I'm going to go with the first baseman, but it's not the one you probably think I'm going to say. It's not Ryan Mountcastle. I think he'll actually have a pretty strong bounce back year for him. I'm say Ryan O'Hearn might be a little bit of a disappointment this year. Getting a little bit older, he didn't have the power numbers that he had in 2023. He increased his on base, which was great, but he just wasn't hitting the ball as hard as often in the air. And I don't know. He's, you got some magic out of him. You brought him in, you revitalized him, and made him into a key part of the last 2 playoff teams. But I think you might see him fall off a little bit. And honestly, there was not a lot of areas, especially in the lineup, where I could find a crack to even say there's going to be a disappointment. But I just feel like there's a real possibility he kind of falls off, not a cliff, but just a little more than maybe a lot of people are expecting. And then luckily, we have a lot of players in AAA that could be able to step up, whether it's spring training heroes, the Machine, or Dylan Carlson, or Samuel Basayo at some point. I think he might be replaced at some point during the season on the roster.
I think I'm going to do a cop-out answer a bit because I'm going to say it's going to be this player or this player. But they've been on similar trajectories so far in their career. I'm going to say it's either going to be Colton Cowser or Jordan Westberg. I think one of them is going to have just a bit of we'll call it a sophomore slump because it's their second full year in the big leagues, even though they both did debut in 2023 and in Westberg's case, play a big role down the stretch in 2023. I just think with Westberg, he was an all-star last year, and then we didn't see him in the second half. So we still haven't seen what a full season looks like for him. And it is harder to project when you haven't seen a full season in the big leagues if that 125 WRC plus is actually something that he would do throughout a whole season. And he has a swinging strike rate that doesn't truly match up with his fairly low strikeout rate. And there's some worry that could jump a little bit, the K rate this year, that the contact could go down a little bit. I think Jordan Westberg is a fantastic player. I just think people think he could ascend to like not the gunner level, but the level below that as a player where he is a perennial all-star. And I'm not sure he's that player, and that's okay. I think he's more of a player that makes an all-star team every once in a while, but is just a really good regular in your lineup year in and year out. And I think that will disappoint some people if he has a little bit of a down year. And if it's not him, I could see a situation where Cowser keeps hitting the ball hard and plays great defense, but the strikeout rate stays above 30%. And it's just like kind of a slog to watch him at times. But whether it's that Westberg or Cowser, I think it's more of a sophomore slump than anything that shows what they'll really be throughout their career.
I think it goes without saying that most of the time when we make these predictions, we hope we're wrong. And I really hope I'm wrong on this one. But my expectations for Cedric Mullins coming into this year are not very high. We've talked about it a little bit before. And there's a lot of nuances to Mullins' season last year you could pick apart. His first half was terrible. His second half, in August in particular, was pretty good. And he was great for the Orioles in the playoffs. But when I start to dig into the data, I see some things that really alarm me. His bat speed last year was in the 33rd percentile, hard hit rate 16%, barrel percentage 20%, average exit velocity in the 16th percentile. He just did not hit the ball that hard last year. he's the kind of player that will still give you some value if he doesn't hit because he has the speed and he has the defense. But I do get concerned that if Mullins struggles, up until the All-Star break and even a little bit through it, you're going to start thinking about, okay, what are we going to do in center field for the rest of this year? Because while Mullins is a good guy to have off the bench, we can't run him out there night after night anymore. And not to mention, we know that when Cedric Mullins gets into a rut, he is basically unplayable against lefties. And that concern, I think, is going to be really compounded by his struggles if he gets off to a slow start this year. Now, a little bit later on in the show, I'm going to talk about how the Orioles are going to address that. But for now, I'm going to say I think Cedric Mullins has a down year.
Yeah, I like Zach's preface there to his answer. We do hope all of these are wrong, and this is the hardest one for me to kind of think about. But I don't have good vibes about Grayson Rodriguez. But year 3 now with injuries, and I know it doesn't seem too serious, and he's essentially starting spring training now and hopes to be back soon once he ramps up. But I need gas can Grayson back on that mound, but I am prepared for Grayson to be one of the bigger disappointments this year that we just don't see much of him this year, unfortunately. But I hope that one is dead wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. We're always trying to be positive, but there are always disappointments every year, so we got to try to pick them. My next question is rookie eligible player with the biggest impact. And I'll preface this by saying the non-Sugano division. So let's go with Zach.
I'm going to go with Brandon Young. I think Brandon Young is going to have 10 to 12 starts in the major leagues this year. And when we look back on it, we're generally going to be happy that Brandon Young had some time in the majors this year. Like we saw with Cade Povich last year. Sometimes with rookie starters, you're going to get a good game, and then sometimes you're going to get one that is really ugly. And we're probably going to see that from Young a little bit this year, but I buy into what we saw, the little bit of a stuff jump from him at spring training. He looks strong now, 2 years removed from the Tommy John surgery. And let's face it, he had a really, really strong case to get to the major leagues last year. I think the Orioles didn't bring him up because he had thrown a lot of innings, and the rotation kind of leveled off enough in September that they weren't that desperate for help. But he easily could have logged his first appearance in the major leagues already. I think he's very close to being major league ready, and he'll get his time this year, and it's generally going to be productive and successful.
I've got the same answer, so I'll just add to that. Once he got sent down to minor league camp earlier this spring, I wrote something quick up over on Substack, and it was small spring data. Obviously, it was only like 6 innings, I think, of StatCast we got from him. That might have been his entire spring data, his spring performance, actually. But a lot of the pitch data was very similar to his AA numbers. And I remember when Lance Bresdowski brought those to light last season, I think I don't know if you mentioned the article or you mentioned when he came on the show, but some concern about how that would regress with the pro ball and AAA. And it seemed like that did happen. But I think it was fatigue, with COVID and coming back from the second Tommy John surgery, the COVID season that he missed. The second Tommy John surgery, he really doesn't have a ton of mileage on that arm. And he was a workhorse last year. So we saw the fastball velo up 2 miles per hour. And a lot of the data, the induced vertical break, spin, all this stuff looked very good. So I think Brandon Young and Baseball America just put out a good article themselves this morning, kind of highlighting all of that and a little bit more and saying it is now considered a plus fastball. So I think Young has set himself up very nicely to be productive this year in the big leagues.
I think it's got to be Chase McDermott. If this lat thing gets figured out, he threw a bullpen last week. That's all good signs, whether it's a starter or reliever, whatever, whether he's on the DL Hall track, just you got to let it rip at some point this year. The Orioles pitching staff as a whole, I think this bullpen is going to be really, really good, but the pitching staff in a whole has some questions. And Chase McDermott right now, in terms of stuff, is probably a top 10 arm in this organization, maybe. It combines stuff with proximity to the big leagues. Like, at some point, he's got to let it rip. Maybe it'll be in a couple of different roles, but I'm excited about that. I thought actually you guys would say Chase McDermott already, so I had another answer holstered, but I wanted to jump in with McDermott. I will just throw out this name because the Orioles have a really good bullpen, and one of the reasons why is I think they have a really strong trio of lefties in Aiken, Soto, and Perez. But if one goes down, The next lefty to call on is one Luis Gonzalez, who is now on the 40-man roster. And I am intrigued to see if a lefty did go down, if the Orioles just kind of added another righty, because there's probably some righties above Gonzalez in the pecking order, or if they said, we really like having this many lefties in the bullpen, we put this guy on the 40-man for a reason, and kind of finally he gets to see what he could do in Baltimore.
I am a big Luis Gonzalez fan. I like that shout. And I also love Brandon Young. I think it was in that Baseball America article that he's learning a sinker now too. He wants to, that seems to be the trend, multiple fastballs. Love that. He's probably have the best fastball on the team if he was in the majors right now, or at least as of the starting pitchers, I should say. Big Brandon Young fan. Chase McDermott as well. Yeah, I think he could have an impact out of the bullpen, especially late in the season. But I'm going to say Kobe Mayo. I think him getting sent down, all the comments, all the hoopla around that. Is he going to be traded? Is he going to get overpassed or not get a chance this year? I think he's still going to be up relatively soon. And whether it's because of an injury or because of underperformance by somebody, I think he's going to get a chance, and I think he's going to seize it. And I think he'll get 250, 300 plate appearances, and by the end of the season, be another offensive weapon that one of the best offenses already in the game has at their disposal.
I think that's a good segue to this next question, which is, where will the Orioles offense, starting rotation, and bullpen rank in MLB? And I'll go back to Bob for this one.
I think the offense will be top 5, maybe top 3 in baseball. I think the bullpen will be between top 5 to top 7, as long as Sir Anthony Dominguez isn't giving up 2 home runs every outing. And the starting pitchers, I'll say, I think they'll be better than, I think I saw 26 somewhere today. I think it'll be better than that. I think it'll be in like the 17 to 22 range, if I had to guess.
I said offense top 4, rotation 16th. Not sexy, but gets the job done. Bullpen, it's top 5.
I will say bullpen first, because if anyone has not listened to the bold predictions episode from Locked On Orioles on Monday, I predicted that, as my boldest prediction, the Orioles would set the all-time record for F WAR by a bullpen in a single season, which is held by the Eric Gagne Cy Young 2003 Dodgers. That's probably a little too bold, but this is the number 2 projected bullpen by Fangraphs this year. Like, I don't quite know why people are so down on this bullpen. It is the best bullpen on paper this team has had since like the prime Buck Showalter pens, where Michael Givens was like your 5th best reliever, because that's how good the bullpen was. They have 5 to 6 dudes with closer type stuff in this bullpen. And some of this hinges on Felix at some point getting back to 2023 Felix. But if he does, they have length, they have lefties, they have righties, they have strikeout stuff, they have ground ball guys. They have everything you could want out of a bullpen. And it could get better, because there's a scenario where Albert Suarez just kind of loses it and the Orioles call up like a more exciting arm to be in his spot. Like Chase McDermott maybe takes that spot in the bullpen. So I think bullpen number 1. I'll go homer pick and say offense number 2 behind the Dodgers. And I'll say rotation 19th in baseball.
I'm going to go bullpen second. I agree with everything that Connor said. And one other thing I would add to that is I actually think the depth at Norfolk this year of pure relief type arms, not even counting the guys who are starters like Chase McDermott that could come up and pitch out of the bullpen, is pretty impressive this year. I mean, if not for an injury, Matt Bowman would probably be in Norfolk's bullpen right now. You have Luis Gonzalez, who we mentioned earlier. There's a lot of interesting arms that are going to be pitching out of the Tide's bullpen this year. So your reinforcements from AAA, if you have an injury, especially a short-term injury, are going to be pretty solid. The lineup, I think, will finish 3rd in the league in most rankings. And then I'll go the rotation at 18 with noticeable first, second half splits, and that the second half is better than the first.
I like it. Lots of bullpen arms to look at. We talked about already, but who's going to be the breakout reliever in 2025? Maybe not for the whole season, but at least for a chunk of the year. Orioles fans are talking about. Connor, you going back to Luis Gonzalez? Well,
yeah, I think it'll be Luis Gonzalez. I think at some point he gets a chance. I don't know if Brian Baker can break out when he's already had a good season in the big leagues in 2022. Can he re-break out? If anyone listens to Effectively Wild, all they've talked about for 3 months is what is considered a breakout player. So Brian Baker, maybe not a breakout if he's already had a good season, but Luis Gonzalez could definitely be one. I mean, you could have this plethora of dudes who could get to the big leagues, like a Cameron Weston or a Chase McDermott in that role, or, I mean, count me on the Levi Stout train. I am extremely intrigued by what he does on the hill if he sticks in this organization. I think there's some interesting NRIs. Like, the depth plus the top end talent of this bullpen is very exciting. But yeah, I think Luis Gonzalez will just flummox hitters with like a 17% strikeout rate and like a 72% ground ball rate, and just keep getting. He will be lefty Dylan Tate for this team. I think there's a chance.
I'm going to go with a guy that's on a lot of people's radars already, and his short stint in the majors last year prompted some excitement. I think Colin Selby at some point comes up this year and puts together really good work in middle relief. It might, hopefully the bullpen is healthy enough that you don't have to bring him up too early in the year. But as I just mentioned a minute ago, there's a lot of solid, pure relief arms that are going to start the year in Norfolk. Selby is certainly among that group. The PITS data with him has always been good. It's been a challenge for him to consistently have success in the upper levels of the minor leagues. But I think he puts together a nice start to the season in Norfolk. And maybe by August, you see him in the Major League bullpen, and he gives the Orioles a final couple good months to the season.
That would have been my pick as well, but is he okay?
I know.
Do we know? He made one spring training outing. He gave up 4 runs, and he was sent to minor league camp in like February for a guy who I think we all thought was, if there was going to be an injury, which there ended up being, was going to be competing for that roster spot. Now, he probably wouldn't have got it anyway because he has options and the other guys don't. But I felt like we should have been in a spot where Colin Selby's right in the mix right now to get Andrew Kittredge's spot, and instead he's nowhere to be found. So that does worry me a bit. I don't know if anyone saw anything with him throwing in minor league spring training games or whatever it may be, but I worry about the health of Colin Selby at the moment.
So strange. Yeah, that he was going to be my pick if it wasn't for the curious case of him getting sent to minor league camp, like you said. But I am a Selby fan. Also, I think a guy that is super under the radar, Gerald Ogando, was like having some real success late in spring, and I'm very curious to see if he gets a look. But my pick's going to be Thad Ward. I thought he actually looked pretty good in spring, and he's got a good sweeper. He's got a nice sinker. He's got a nice mix. I don't think he's going to be a starting pitcher on this team, but for a guy that could come up, give you some solid innings in the middle innings, I liked what I saw from Thad Ward. I'm curious to see what he can do.
He at times does not know where it's going, but that sweeper, I believe some of the sweepers he threw in spring training, I talked about this on my show, had more horizontal break than like the Greg Weissert sweeper, which is the sweepiest sweeper in baseball. It moves more than anybody's. And Thad Ward was throwing sweepers that moved more than that. Now, he's got to command his stuff a little bit better, but I can see why the Orioles claimed a guy off waivers who had like a 6 ERA in the Nats AAA rotation last year.
Harness a little bit for those 1 inning rolls. I like, my pick was going to be Levi Stout that Connor mentioned earlier, just because this is according to the TJ Stats model, Thomas Nesteco. In his spring outings, Stout's fastball averaged 95, had 19 inches of induced vertical break, a 102 stuff plus, the slider at a 115 stuff plus grade. So will it translate to big league success? If called upon, we will see. But yeah, the stuff is clearly there for Levi Stout.
Yeah, I think it might have been on our Discord somewhere. Somebody somewhere heard Mike Elias say, like, his stuff is legit to a guy in the stands. I actually think that was a patron. But hey, sign up for the Discord and you get little insights like that. Next question is, we're talking big stuff now. Who's going to be the Orioles MVP in 2025? Nick?
I'm all aboard the Adley Rutschman bounce back this year. I'm going to give it to Adley.
Single Adley. All right.
Yeah. I will take Adley Rutschman as well. I think it's not just a bounce back to his regular performance. I think we're going to see a whole new version of him. I think Levi Stout will probably finish second in most valuable Oriole votes, but I will give it to Adley Rutschman.
I'll go with Gunnar Henderson. I don't think this injury is going to be a long-term setback, and I think that when we see Gunnar on the field again, it will be the best version of Gunnar Henderson that we've seen yet in his career. I think he's going to have top 3 finish in American League MVP voting, and he'll be the Orioles MVP despite competition from Adley.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think Gunner's going to miss like a week, maybe. He'll still play 150 games about. So, yeah, I think he's like Zach said, I think it'll be the best version of Gunner that we've seen. He's always improving. Might be a little bit slow to start just because he didn't get the reps. But, yeah, I think he's going to be MVP caliber all season long. So I'll go with Gunner as well.
All right, who do we think is going to be the Orioles' best pitcher this year? Unofficially, the Orioles Cy Young. Let's start with Connor.
It's going to be Zach Eflin. I mean, it's hard for me to not pick Zach Eflin right now. He's the best healthy pitcher on the team. And without knowing what Grayson's season, Bradish's season, when they trade for somebody is going to look like, I trust no one more in this entire pitching staff than Zach Eflin to just go out there, give you a low 3s ERA, eat a good chunk of innings, stay healthy, have a good pitch mix, just do everything the Orioles wanted and needed him to do when they traded for him. And I think by the end of the year, he might not be the most electric guy. He might not be a guy you want starting game 1 of a playoff series, but for the full picture of what he does, he's got to be the winner.
I don't know what we were predicting a couple weeks ago, or this was probably like 2 months ago at this point, but I'm pretty sure I had Sandy Alcantara like leading the team in innings. I thought that was going to eventually be the move. It is not, so I can't pick him for this one. So yeah, it's same thing. I'm going with the opening day guy, Eflin. But I just think because this is going to fit my narrative, it's going to be Zach Eflin, and the Orioles extend him. Like that video of his daughter telling him he's the starter, the opening day starter, was as heartwarming as it gets. Especially being a girl dad myself, but anybody with a heart had to feel the warm and fuzzies there. Watching that was awesome. Girl dads rock. Eflin rocks. He's going to win this thing and lock him in.
Yeah. Part of me wants to pick Dean Kramer here because I don't know. I feel like he struck out 10 guys in a short stint late in spring. I feel like his stuff is getting better. And the other part of me thinks he's going to pitch his way out of the rotation. So I will avoid that. And yeah, it's Zach Eflin. You can't really pick anyone else right now, I don't think.
Eflin is the safest choice, but it's also the correct choice with where the Orioles stand right now. The way that I view Eflin's production this year is that maybe he's not an ace, but we're going to be very, very happy that he was on the team this year. And Nick, I fully buy into the idea that the Orioles should extend him. And I think that by the All-Star break, anyone who hasn't come around on that idea yet will be banging the door down for it to happen.
Well, we jinxed that one, the clean sweep jinx. So let's move to the biggest storyline of the 2025 season, Bob.
Biggest storyline is going to be Jackson Holiday is finally Jackson Holiday that was clamored for last season. I think not only is he going to be an all-star in 2025, I think he might get some MVP votes at the end of the season. I think he's got the toe tap in play now. He's comfortable with it. He looked really comfortable and good all spring long, defensively, offensively. I think he's going to be the leadoff hitter by the trade deadline. By the midpoint of the season, I think he'll move up to about leadoff, and I just think he's going to bat like 290 with 15 home runs, 30 stolen bases, and announce his arrival. I think it's the Jackson Holiday show this year.
I really think it's the starting rotation and who steps up. I think Zach Eflin is kind of a known quantity in what he's going to do. Who steps up behind him? Does Grayson Rodriguez return? Does one of these X factors, question marks, young guys? Really, the big question is like, who's going to be this 5 at the end of the year? We know who the 5 is at the beginning of the year. Who's going to be pitching when the Orioles are fighting for potentially a wild card spot or a division in September? I think that's going to be a story all season long. It's been a story since the moment Corbin Burns signed with the Diamondbacks, to be honest, and it is going to continue to be that way all year. And I think it is going to be because this team is going to have a top 5 bullpen and a top 5 offense. And it is going to be, will the starting rotation, A, be middle of the pack and let those other groups win them games? Or B, will it be around where Fangraphs projected it today, which is 23rd? And will it lose them games in ways that the bullpen and the offense can't make up sometimes? I think that's going to be the storyline, not just in general for the whole season, but night in, night out. Honestly, on the 4 nights Zach Eflin doesn't pitch, I think it's going to really be a storyline, especially to begin the season.
I'm going to say the return of Felix Bautista, because I don't know that people quite have grasped yet how much that means to the bullpen. Because if you didn't have Bautista healthy, right now we'd be talking about, well, what can they get from Sir Anthony Dominguez and Gregory Soto and Yenier Cano in the closer's role? It's the same that Andrew Kittredge isn't going to be healthy. Now it looks like the whole bullpen is going to collapse. Andrew Kittredge is going to miss at least a few months. And with the depth the Orioles have, it's not that big of a deal because they have Bautista. I don't think Bautista is going to return to dominance right away this year. I would not be surprised if the first 2 months in particular are a little rough around the edges. And you have some outings in there where he comes into a game with maybe a 2-run lead and gets the job done, but makes it a little bit more uncomfortable than you would have liked. But then I think that once he's back on the mound long enough, he's going to refine that dominance. And the second half, he's going to be lights out.
I just zoomed out a little bit and looked at pitching development as a whole, because that's our brand. That's what we do. So I'm just going to hammer that point here when I can. The Cade Povich has a solid second season. Brandon Young makes a big impact. Chase McDermott gets healthy and built back up, and we see him make some noise. And of course, to break it down to, into the minor leagues, of course, not everyone who had that initial breakout last year in the minors is going to build on that in year 2, but a couple of guys at least are going to take major steps, and they're going to be massive steps forward in their development. And so I think the pitching is going to outperform expectations at the major league level. You're going to see young guys step up. You're going to see some of these, if it's Herman, it's a Gibson, a Ferret, one of these guys who the Orioles found seemingly out of nowhere is going to establish themselves as, top 100 arms. And people are going to start looking at this Orioles pitching development and Orioles pitching as a whole in the light that it deserves, I think.
Speaking of which, welcome back, Juan Nunez. Nice to have him back in the mix. Top 20 prospect. All right, we're getting down to the nitty-gritty here. AL East standings, Connor.
I will say, I think the Yankees still have the talent to win the division even without Garrett Cole. It's still at least a solid rotation at the very top. They're going to have a good bullpen because they always do. And their offense, I think Jazz Chisholm is going to have a huge year in New York. And I think they'll get just enough from Bellinger and Goldschmidt, not a lot, but enough to allow Aaron Judge to kind of carry the rest of the team. I don't think that team is built to win the World Series like they were last year, but I think they will eke out the division, followed by the Orioles in second. Then I will go Red Sox, Rays, Blue Jays, and I do think that all 5 teams will be in the mix for most of the season.
Agreed. My order is a little bit different. I'm going Orioles at the top. I'm going Rays number 2. Too much fuss about the stadium situation, although I'm sure it'll make an impact. But I like this pitching staff if they stay healthy, and I like the lineup. So I'm going to go Orioles, Rays, Yankees, Red Sox, Blue Jays.
I'm going to go Red Sox at the top, and I'll just say that I think the Red Sox are very boom or bust this year. They're either going to push a high 90s win total and have maybe the best offense in the American League ahead of the Orioles, and the starting rotation will be good enough for them to get into the postseason convincingly, or all of this drama that has surrounded them combined with some regression from Garrett Crochet causes them to just collapse entirely. I kind of see it being one of two things from the Red Sox, but I'm going to say that they win the East, followed by the Orioles, and then I'm going to go the Yankees third, Rays fourth, Blue Jays fifth. And I think that kind of like last year, those fourth and fifth place teams are going to be pretty close and are going to be going back and forth for most of the season. The key difference for me is that I like the Rays pitching depth better, and I think the Blue Jays have a clear mandate to get what they can for Bo Bichette and or Vladimir Guerrero Jr. at the deadline this year. if they're out of it. So one of those two, I think, is moved, and Toronto kind of fizzles out at the end of the year. But I do think they're going to be more competitive than a lot of people are expecting.
Yeah, okay. I'll say Orioles first, Red Sox second, make the wild card, Rays third, fight for a wild card. Maybe they get into. I do think it's going to be bunched up pretty closely. I don't see any team like losing 100 games or maybe even 90 games in the East. I'll say Yankees fourth. I just think if Aaron Judge stubs his toe, they're in a lot of trouble. Even with him there, I think they are on the outside looking in. Any more injuries, and it's not looking great. And then I'll say, Blue Jays fifth. The pitching, they just don't have the pitching. The bullpen's not good. They have some nice players on offense, star players, but if they're not healthy or they get traded at the deadline, like I could definitely see happening, that will certainly not help things down the stretch. So I'll say Orioles, Red Sox, Rays, Yankees, Blue Jays.
And we'll get in now to our final predictions. And I'm very happy to announce a new partnership here at Orioles on the Verge for the 2025 season. Longtime friends of ours, Checker Spot Brewing, will be the sponsor of the final segment, Last Call, brought to you by Checker Spot Brewing. Located at 1421 Ridgely Street, not far from Memorial Park at Camden Yards. Checker Spot Brewing open 7 days a week. A lot of good food and beer there. Plus, some exciting news here. You will be able to get one of their signature beers, The Bird is the Word, at Camden Yards this year. Look for it behind home plate. That's Checker Spot Brewing. And look for some details from us sometime this spring on a live show. We're hoping to get something finalized soon. And with that, now I will go into our final prediction of the night. And in one fell swoop, I want you guys to give your division winners, your wild cards, and your World Series prediction. And then follow that up with your bold prediction for the Orioles and your bold prediction for MLB as a whole. Let's start with Connor.
All right, so we're going NL and AL here across the board?
Yes.
All right, so I had the Yankees in the American League East, so I'll take the Yankees. I will take the Twins in the Central to rebound and win. I will take in the AL West, I will take the Astros because I'm not quite ready to quit them just yet. My 3 wild card teams in the American League will actually be the Orioles, the Red Sox, and the Rays. I think the AL East is getting 4 teams into the dance this year. In the National League, I will take I'll take the Braves to not get super injured and win the NL East. I will take the Brewers because who else is going to win that division in the Central? And in the West, obviously, I will take the Rockies. No, I will take the Dodgers. And then my wild card teams will be the Phillies. I will take the Padres and the Diamondbacks. I think the Mets miss out on the playoffs this year. And then do you need World Series? Are we doing World Series?
Yes.
Yes, World Series and then bold predictions. Okay, World Series will be World Series will be the Orioles because why not? The Orioles out of the American League. And this will be the year because I think their window is closing. This will be the year the Phillies finally get one, and I will take Phillies over the Orioles in the World Series, which I think the Eastern Seaboard and Mid-Atlantic would burn. But that would be certainly fun to watch. My bold prediction for the Orioles, I guess I got to take one outside of my 4 bold predictions I did on Locked On Orioles the other day. So I guess my 5th bold prediction will be that the Orioles, what will be my other bold prediction? My other bold prediction will be that the Orioles' second best starter this year will be Sugano behind Eflin. I think even if Grayson comes back for some time, we'll go with Sugano as bold. And my bold prediction in Major League Baseball is that we actually get a rising from the players themselves, not just the fans, to institute the ABS challenge system at some point during this season. Obviously, I don't think it could happen, but I think we're getting it by opening day next year because the players got it in spring training. The minor league players already have it. and then they go from that to then back to the regular umpiring, and it becomes like the number one talking point for the players going into next year.
I like it. I will go follow this up here. I got Orioles winning the East. I have what did I put here? Orioles winning the East, the Royals winning the Central, and in the West I have the Rangers. In the NL I've got Phillies, Brewers, Dodgers, and so the wild cards I am going to say the Rays, the Yankees, and the Guardians. In the AL and the NL, my wild cards are going to be the Padres, the Diamondbacks, and the Mets. And then I also have Orioles, Phillies in the World Series. I think that would actually be a ton of fun. I would be excited to watch that. My bold Orioles prediction, I'm going to go super bold, and I'm going to extend the Adley prediction and say Adley is the American League MVP this year. And my league-wide bold prediction is the Athletics finish second place in the AL West. They're not going to finish second place, but I'm going to get super bold here and say that could happen just because I like the lineup. And, Houston is a very good team, but, the Mariners really didn't do much. The Angels, I don't know. I think the people are going to overlook the A's, but I think they're at least going to shock a ton of people.
All right. Good stuff. I will say Orioles win the AL East. Tigers win the AL Central. Astros win the AL West. And your wild card teams are the Red Sox, the Rangers, and the Rays. In the National League, I will go with the Mets in the East, the Brewers in the Central, the Dodgers in the West. Let's give the Braves, the Cubs, and the Padres the wild cards. So, okay, Diamondbacks don't make the playoffs. All right, I'm doing this on the fly. And then on the World Series, I will say it will be Dodgers over Orioles, and we'll get them back in 2026.
Bold prediction for the Orioles and league-wide?
Bold prediction for the Orioles will be Samuel Basallo gets at least one Rookie of the Year vote. And despite him not premiering until around mid-season, so he'll make an impact in a short amount of time. And league-wide, let's see. I think they'll announce that they're expanding to 32 teams sometime this season.
All right, that's good stuff. I'll wrap up here. The AL, I think the division winners are the Red Sox, the Royals, and the Astros. I'm kind of the opposite of Connor, where I've been wanting to quit the Astros for years, and they just keep popping up. So I'm going to say this year that they win the division, which of course means they're going to go 72-90. Wild card, I'm going to go Orioles, Yankees, Tigers. Then in the National League, I have the Braves winning the East, the Brewers winning the Central, the Dodgers reclaiming the West, and then my wild card teams are the Phillies, Diamondbacks, and Mets. The World Series, I'm going to go the Dodgers over the Royals, who become one of the latest teams that you look at and say, how on earth did they get to the World Series? They will get there and they will lose to the Dodgers, who will be baseball's first repeat champion since 2000. My bold prediction for the Orioles is that Kyle Tucker will be their splash acquisition at the deadline this year. I think that the price for an ace is going to make them back off a little bit, so it'll look more in the Zach Eflin tier for their starting rotation help. And again, target a guy that maybe has a year and a half or 2 years of team control left, like they did with Eflin last year. That will free up the prospects they need to go get the impact veteran bat to add to their lineup and help get them over that hurdle of not being able to win a series in the playoffs. And like I talked about earlier, I don't think the Orioles are going to get much from Cedric Mullins this year. So they bring in Kyle Tucker to offset that, get more offensive production out of the outfield, and we see a lot more Colton Cowser in center field over the final couple months of the season. And then my bold league-wide prediction, the Padres will trade Dylan Cease at the deadline, but not Michael King, because A.J. Preller just can't quit entirely. They will miss the playoffs, and Cease will be traded to the Braves, who will need some rotation help to fend off the Phillies and the Mets. And with that, that does it for the predictions. We'll be back later this week to give you over-unders for the Orioles players based on their projections that are posted over at Fangraphs. In the meantime, you can check us out on many social media channels, including Facebook, Instagram, Threads, X, TikTok, and YouTube. We're also over at Substack, OriolesOnTheVerge.substack.com. And while you're browsing around the internet, be sure to head over to our Patreon community and sign up to become a member today. Beginning next week, we will have bonus weekly coverage throughout the season, as well as monthly updates to our top 50 prospects list and more. You're not going to want to miss that. Thank you, Connor Newcomb, for joining us. Connor is going to be back with us later on this week. For Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens, this is Zach Spedden. You've been listening to Orioles on the Verge, presented by Bet Online and part of the Believe Podcast Network.